Bionic Commando is one of those games that I rented a few times as a kid and just never really could figure out what the heck I was supposed to be doing or what was going on. I'm sure there wasn't even a manual with it, and I don't know, but the music was super cool. But seriously, never had a clue. Even the controls threw me for a loop. It's possible I never made it past this first barrel, but I can't really remember. For starters, you can't jump. No jumping, so just delete all pre-stored information you have in your brain about platformers because it's totally non-applicable here. You have this bionic arm that works sort of like a grappling hook. You can use it to swing around or shoot straight upwards to a platform above. It's tricky and we'll get to all of that, but let's talk about the story here. Bionic Commando was developed and released by Capcom in 1988 on the NES, but there's kind of a wacky backstory with this game. Bionic Commando was first released as an arcade cabinet, known in Japan as Top Secret, and Bionic Commando in the USA. In this game you play as a guy named Super Joe, and although the gameplay in the arcade version is similar with your character using a bionic arm as a grappling hook to get around levels, the actual game is entirely different and also very linear compared to the NES version. Still with me? Okay, so the arcade version of Bionic Commando was technically marketed as a sequel to the NES game Commando, and the character was nicknamed Super Joe in Americanized versions of the game. So that means in Commando and the arcade version of Bionic Commando, you're playing as Super Joe. However, in the NES version of Bionic Commando, you're actually playing as another nameless character who the manual refers to simply as a brave man. The goal here is to actually rescue Super Joe, who's been taken hostage by the evil Nazis and General Kilt. Yeah, and there's a whole other backstory to the Japanese version of Bionic Commando that we're gonna get to in a bit, but now that you've got the gist of all this Bionic Commando business, let's get to the game. You've got a few brief cutscenes talking about some older evil empire called the Bads, and a new evil empire led by General Kilt. Super Joe was sent off to deal with the situation, but they've lost contact with Joe, and now it's up to you and your bionic arm to go find Super Joe and get to the bottom of this whole General Kilt situation. The game starts you out on this overworld screen, and you can choose whether or not to descend to an area or fly your helicopter to another area. That's one really cool thing about this game, is that it's actually open-ended. You pretty much have free reign to go wherever you want, although some areas may require a special item to actually get through it, and we'll get to that. Once you pick an area, the chopper drops you off and now you're in. The levels themselves are somewhat non-linear as well, although for the most part they're not too complicated. You play as the Bionic Commando, and like I said before, you cannot jump at all, so just forget about all of this jumping business. Can't be done. You can't do it. You start off with a basic cannon that shoots all the way across the screen, and then you can shoot your grappling arm in several directions, and you'll need to master this as a means of transportation if you want to go very far in this game. Certain areas require absolutely precise jumping, especially this part with these spikes, and the hit detection is pretty unforgiving if you mess this up. One weird thing is that you can't shoot upwards with your gun, but you can with your grappling arm. I'm not sure if this was a deliberate choice or an oversight, but it can lead to a bit of frustration in levels where overhead enemies are common. And there are some levels that are vertically scrolling where maybe you're trying to make your way up a tower or something. It'd be so much easier if you could shoot up. You can shoot your grappling arm up, and it does a little bit of damage, but not nearly enough. Alright, so once you get the hang of the grappling arm and are comfortable getting around, you've got a couple of things you need to accomplish in these levels. First, you're going to want to find these rooms with computer terminals in them. You can do two things here. You can use it to jack in and call back to your command base and see what's going on. Sometimes you'll need to do this to have them open up a door for you or give you some helpful information or something. The other thing that you can do is actually wiretap into the enemy's comms and see what they're up to. Sometimes it's just idle chatter, but sometimes it might be little hints like maybe there's a broken elevator, how to beat a certain boss, or possibly even the location of Super Joe. It's actually kind of cool and gives this a Metal Gear type feel. Eventually in these levels you'll find your way to a boss door, although these are hit or miss. To be honest, you can get through these by just destroying the large computer at the end of the room without even killing the boss, and a lot of times the boss has a spot where you can stand and just deal out damage without taking any yourself. Knock out the boss, and you'll usually get some sort of helpful weapon or item to help you out in your mission, and that's where the game starts to get really fun. You start finding all sorts of cool special weapons like a rocket launcher or a spread gun, and you'll need that rocket launcher too. Some of the enemies drive around in these large, powerful tanks. You may also find items like a flare that you'll need to use in certain dark levels so you can see what's going on. Some of the levels are weird too. Alright, so as you're navigating around the screen, you'll see these trucks driving around between the levels. If you run into one of these, you'll get thrown into a short top-down level that will look familiar to fans of the original Commando game on NES. These are short, and you can just run through them if you want, but the weirdest levels are these areas that are highlighted in red. So you'll see white areas and red areas. The white areas are always going to be levels that you'll have to fight through with a boss. The red areas are these neutral zones. You go in and the guy at the beginning will tell you not to fire on anybody or everyone will start attacking you, and it's like a little little town that you can just walk around in. There's NPCs that you can talk to. Hey, isn't that General Kilt? What the heck is he doing here? Kill him, kill him, kill him! This game is weird, man. There's typically an item that you need hidden somewhere in these areas, so you'll want to explore around a bit, and it pays to be thorough. In one spot, there was this wall. I shot through it even though I knew I wasn't supposed to open fire. Then I started getting attacked, so I ducked into this room and ended up finding another item, this time a different communicator. This was cool because it felt like I found something I wasn't necessarily supposed to find yet. I was doing my best to avoid walkthroughs and just exploring the game on my own, which really is the way to go. So that's another thing about these communicators. You start off with a basic one, but there are 4 total in the game and each one can be used in a different area. At the beginning of a level, you have the option to pick which weapon, power-up, or radio communicator you want to take with you. When you get to a computer room, if you try to use the wrong communicator, the speaker starts yelling at you and then enemies start paratrooping into the room endlessly and you have to leave the area and come back with a different communicator. Okay, so the good news here is there's a trick. If you get into an area and realize you don't have the right item, communicator, weapon, whatever, you can extract from the zone quickly by pressing Start plus A and B at the same time, and then you'll just go back to the overworld. So yeah, overall the open-ended aspect of this game, exploring the areas and finding new items and weapons, is a lot of fun once you get the hang of moving around, and also I do have to say the music is some of my favorite on the console. A lot of the areas look really cool too, with some neat looking backgrounds, and the characters and enemies all are really detailed and slick looking. My only gripes about this game are not being able to shoot upwards, and controlling your grappling arm is just unforgiving as all heck. It will take a lot of practice to get your mind wrapped around moving around the areas like this. Once you get the hang of it for a while, it does become second nature. It's kind of like when you played Turok Dinosaur Hunter on Nintendo 64. For that week that you're playing Turok, you can't play any other game because your brain is totally scrambled. Some of the areas are just brutal too, and I do mean brutal. You have my permission to abuse the heck out of save states for some of these. This is one of those games that would have begged for a Super NES upgrade. It was way ahead of its time in 1988. It did eventually get a sequel on Game Boy, as well as Bionic Commando Rearmed, which was kind of a hybrid remake deal. There was also a full-on 3D version of the game just called Bionic Commando that came out in 2009 for Xbox 360, PS3, and Windows. I haven't played any of those, but if you have, I'd be curious to hear what you thought about them. Alright, so by now you're looking at this, and it looks like a pretty straightforward NES action game where you're facing off against some generic bad guy with names like General Kilt and the Bads and what have you. But if you look a little closer and start looking at names like the NAS, the ominous red flags in the background with the eagles, and this guy, what's he doing with his arm there? Alright, so I told you I was going to get to the backstory on the Japanese version of this game, so here you go. In Japan, this game was initially called Hitler's Resurrection Top Secret. And yeah, all of the bad guys were Nazis, the eagles on those flags were really, well, you know, and the main bad guy was none other than Adolf Hitler. In the cutscene at the end when you beat the game, it literally shows Hitler's face exploding. Oh man, oh wow. Alright, well, I think that's all for this week. As always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.